Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's session on enhancing psychological health, wellness, and resilience in the ongoing era of COVID-19. My real pleasure to be with your group today. And as Joe has touched on, my goodness, so many of us are on this roller coaster of emotions. We all have kind of waves where things feel better and a little bit more hopeful and optimistic for a period of time. Yet for many of us collectively, there's this heaviness, and the reality is that is having very tangible and measurable impacts on our psychological health. And so just the same way we're all doing all the good things that we can to not get sick and stay healthy and boost up our physical immune system, in exactly the same way we need to all be putting dedicated attention on our emotional health, if nothing else, for the reason that we know our emotional health and our immunity is very intimately tied. We have just under an hour together here today. I could spend a whole day, possibly even a week, talking about this topic. So you're going to get the bird's eye view. I'm going to present some stats to you, going to then go into some evidence-based tips, and we'll follow up with just a resource and a toolkit that kind of elaborates on some of the things that are being introduced to you today. And so we're going to talk about the current reality, things that we can do to manage stress and burnout, and my favorite, how to enhance work-life harmony. And so we're feeling burnt out, and we're all feeling pulled in multiple different competing ways. And so really important for us to kind of pay some attention to ways that we can enhance and mitigate the effects of burnout. And just as I'm going through, if you're so inclined, feel free to share a few thoughts or phrases on maybe how you feel you've been doing as we kind of think of, third week of January, here we are, and how's emotional and mental health for you. So let's dive right into looking at the state of mental health. Full stop, we know that the situation around mental health is serious, and it needs our immediate attention. And in the past 2 years, we have seen exponential rises in all kinds of things related to how we're emotionally doing. Lots of numbers on this slide, but here's what we know. If I was speaking to you 2 years ago, I would have told you that 1 out of 5, 20% of us on this call today would have met criteria at some point through the year for one of the main mental health issues. We know COVID plus, because there's a whole bunch of things in addition to COVID that have impacted us, have doubled those rates. So about 40%, almost half of us on this call this morning would meet textbook criteria for one of the main mental health issues. We know that physicians are seeing depression, anxiety, and stress as being the fastest rising health issue. We know half of us, by the time we're age 40, have dealt with mental health issues. And we know this costs our workplaces and our economy a lot. Of note, we know that just this week, 500,000 employed Canadians will not go to work because of mental health issues. We also know that while we are a lot more open in sharing physical health conditions, even chronic conditions like cancer or diabetes or hypertension, we are much more reticent to discuss having a mental health issue. We know, of course, COVID has been a unifying thread through the last couple of years, but here's what we also know is there's been a whole other whack of stuff happening in our society, in our world, all the way from climate crises to election fatigue issues, plus that has weighed on our mental health. And of course, normal life stuff has kept happening, right? We're still going through things like challenges with our kids and divorces and separations and deaths of loved ones. And so all of this collectively has created this upheaval in our personal life. We know if we look at the numbers that most people will say that their mental health has been negatively impacted. We know that this has led to as high as a quadrupling of anxiety rates, a doubling of depression rates and suicidality, and a massive uptick in alcohol consumption. Okay, so at least 25%. And that's usually a pretty gross underestimate because we don't reveal how much we're usually drinking. But here's the thing, alcohol is the most popular and common and for time limited self-medication, because it kind of works in the short term. And of course, all kinds of things have led to increases in alcohol as well. And so we kind of want to think of that triad of anxiety, depression, and alcohol use as being the things that are most impacting us as individuals, our partners, our kids, our parents, our friends, our coworkers, and know that the numbers don't lie. So while we may think, I'm immune to that, that wouldn't really impact me, these are data that cut across every sector and every segment across our Canadian workforce. And of course, as alluded to, while COVID has been the most salient constant that we've had many other challenges and stressors that just have, for some of us kind of exhausted us. They feel very heavy. Many things feel out of our control. And some of us feel kind of unsure about what future looks like. And so all these kinds of interesting questions that are being raised for us in terms of the lives that we want to live and who we want to be around and even what we want to do for a living. And this is a real strong commonality that we've seen. And so just by way of very quick recap here, we're dealing with a massive mental health issue. And in fact, the World Health Organization will talk about mental health as being the echo pandemic. Right? So this pandemic that is kind of secondary and resulting from the core physical pandemic that we have. This has impacted every single one of our workplaces and most every single one of us in some way, big or small. We have dealt with all kinds of things, right? All these lasts that we had, the last trip, the last vacation, the last time we saw some people, and a whole bunch of new firsts that of course have started to become commonplace, but yet moving parts in some ways that are happening every week for us. And when we're under unpredictability and when things are out of our control, that's very unsettling to us psychologically. We know that this colliding that we've seen for those of us that have been able to work from home, between work and home and our social lives, it isn't the panacea that we thought it was, right? And once upon a time, right, a few of us had there was the sex appeal of like, I get to work from home. I can stay in my pajamas. I can throw a load of laundry in the day, right? And for many of us, the lack of structure and routine that's created is starting to have a shelf life, right? And of course, lots of differences here. Some of us are loving this transition. Some of us are wanting the absolute opposite, and most of us are somewhere in the middle somewhere. And of course, all kinds of life events that have continued and societal events that have continued to increase our levels of stress and anxiety. And so, if nothing else, I invite you to just reflect on that 40% number, knowing of your colleagues and coworkers and loved ones, that so many of us are struggling, yet so many of us find it hard to verbalize or articulate what's happening, especially if you know someone in your life that is single, that's gone through a recent divorce or death or separation. Make sure that you're reaching out because there's such an emotional isolation that many people are feeling. And so, now let's think about stress a little bit, and stress and burnout and what stress is, and, how and what we can do to better manage this. I'm just going to start with a little pulse check here with you. And let's just take a look at your stress level this week. Okay, with 1 being no stress and 5 being extremely stressed. Where are you at today or this week? Okay, so let's take a look. Okay, about half of people saying I'm feeling a little stress. We have close to 40%, so about a third saying I'm feeling stress or feeling a lot of stress, and a handful saying I'm feeling no stress. And I just want to kind of read out the comment that came in here from John, which is, really resonates for me as well. I feel better for the holidays, but struggle to form routines while at home all the time, which is usually a major coping mechanism. It's also hard to find ways to wind down after work, particularly with sport and exercise disrupted. And I'm with John. It's like fun has been canceled. Very, very well put. And that really is a shared sentiment. I'm just curious how others are feeling about that as well. What we know is about 21% of Canadians are saying I'm experiencing high or extremely high levels of stress. And we think about stress, and it's this word that we use a lot, right? Everything's stressful. Work stressful, our email stressful, making dinner stressful, right? We think, what is stress? Very simply, stress is the experience that we have emotionally and physically when the demands that are on us, work, personal, financial, other, when they exceed the reserve or the resources we have. Right? And so we can all think of times when life is going awesome, right? Our taxes are done and our bills are paid. We've got some money in the bank. Our relationship's going awesome. Maybe we're sleeping like a rock star. We're getting an exercise, right? When life looks like that, we can deal with even very big stressors that come our way, and we're not thrown, right? We're able to bounce and roll with the punches, and we take it and we go, and it just doesn't seep into affecting every part of our life. But when those resources are taxed, if we're dealing with financial stress, relationship stress, we have uncertainty about work, when we have confusion about what to do about vaccines, right? When all these things are starting to come up, when we're not able to engage in sports and go to the gym and do the things that we normally used to, well, then what starts to happen is those demands, right? The kid that's driving you crazy, or the house that's not cleaned, or the looming work deadline, that all of these things can start to feel like that kind of proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back. And of course, we have very little control over that which is unpredictable and out of our control. Little bit of an obvious statement, but what we can put our energy into is recognizing when our alarm bells are starting to shoot off and say, hold on. Maybe the stress is not serving me. That's step number one. And then starting to control the good old habits that we know can facilitate a good kind of building of those reserves. And so I just invite you all to just reflect for yourself on where your level of stress is at. And, we know we all have acute stressors that come in our lives. So these are the, fleeting but frustrating daily things, right? Being caught in a traffic jam, our kid having a tantrum as we're trying to get out the door, a short-term conflict with our partner, right? So these things come and go. And when the acute thing disappears, our mood kind of goes back to usual, a very normal part of life. Now we know that when we have a collective sum of ongoing stressors and are under ongoing stress that isn't going away, right? Maybe we're under it for weeks or even months. In some cases, it can even be years. That starts to deplete our resiliency over time. And the reality is our body is very well wired to deal with acute stressors, right? We are just fundamentally beings that are resilient, but we are not wired to deal with ongoing chronic stress. And of course, the pandemic plus has led to all kinds of background chronic stressors. And then we know that, chronic stress over time can start to reveal itself like ongoing, constant emotional distress. Feels overwhelming, affects our ability to show up the ways that we want to our families, to work. We're more irritable, we're more annoyed. We might be feeling low, anxious, hopeless. And so those are things to consider. And so think about what some of your stress signs are, because we all have some commonalities, but we are all very unique in how our stress manifests. And one of the most important things we can start to do when we're working on cultivating our psychological health is getting real good at knowing what our stress signs are. And so we know there's a bunch of things our body does when we're exposed to stress. Our digestion slows down. So this is why eating habits go off, right? And so either we're, eating carb heavy, unhealthy food. Sometimes we have no appetite at all and, kind of not interested. We may have measurable changes in weight gain, which for many has been on the uptick over the last couple of years. We're sitting more, we're eating more, we're drinking more. We know that our blood is kind of diverted from our exterior. So when we're dealing with stress, it all goes toward our core to kind of keep us alive. Our sexual reproduction slows down. And I say this because this is one of these things that we don't talk a lot about in our society. But this is why there's no, for those of us that are in intimate relationships, intimate life can start to be impacted. And then there's stress. There's the symptoms of our stress, but then we can have other resulting issues that just start to snowball because of that. Our heart rate starts to increase. We're a lot more hypervigilant. We're more on edge. We're a little bit more reactive, right? And these are all things to consider when we are trying to pay attention to how we are doing at a moment in time. And of course, some of these things are going to be very obvious signs for us, right? Sleep. I know for me, the first sign, I don't sleep nearly as much as I should, just because of work demands and life demands. But I sleep solidly when I do get into bed when I'm feeling well. And I know one of the biggest things for me, that's that first sign, is when sleep starts to go off for a week or two. And I'm finding that even that restricted sleep is off and I'm staying awake or waking up in the middle of the night or my thoughts are going. I'm like, that's usually a little signal to me that I need to step back and look at reshifting something. We may notice visible lack of appetite or increase in appetite, weight loss, weight gain, our intimate relationships become impacted. We may start to get more aches and pains, right? We feel achy and sore and maybe headaches and back pains. Maybe we're getting a little bit kind of borderline sick. We don't really get sick, but we feel a little bit kind of blah. And so these things are important to keep in mind, because when we're improving our emotional health, we start to see a positive impact on all of these areas of life. And we don't want to do away with stress. And here's what's important is what we want to do is get very good at recognizing our stress and recognizing what the function of that stress is. Okay, so we all have important functions. And so sometimes, right, we have a big deadline, and let's say we need to get something in by 5 o'clock today, right? That stress forces us to tune everything else out, get hyper-focused on the task at hand, and take action, right? And that's a good thing. In short doses, that's a good thing. Sometimes when we're feeling ongoing or chronic stress, it's a little signal that we need to get some support. Sometimes that means we're going to a coworker or our manager or supervisor or boss. Maybe we need a little bit more support. Maybe we need to let them know that we're struggling a bit. Sometimes we need to reach out to a buddy or a friend and be able to just like get the stuff that we're feeling out. I'm a psychologist, and I will tell you that talk therapy works, right? Being able to get the craziness that's in our heads and be able to kind of get that out, to be able to share that with someone, right? Sometimes we're seeing someone that's an objective, neutral party, right? Like a therapist. And so this is a great time for everybody to be considering maximizing the benefits that you have, right? The extended benefits that give you coverage to see a psychologist or a counselor, because that helps. And we know that therapy works. Sometimes our emotions are just telling us that world and life isn't the way that we want it to be, right? There's that self-validation component that says this isn't the world or the life that I want to be in. And so what's one of the important things when we're feeling stress is to ask ourselves one question: what's the function of this right now? Okay, and what do I need to do? So for those of you that may be having, you get into bed and your body's exhausted and out go all the lights and the brain is on fast forward at 10, 11, 12 at night or whatever that time is, you're going to bed and your thoughts are going, right? Big part of what's happening to a lot of people, right? Insomnia is our thoughts take over. To ask yourself, what's the function of this right now? What's the action I need to be taking right now? When we get those middle of night awakenings, right? And the bewitching hour of waking up is usually between about 3:30 and 4:30 in the morning. And again, thoughts are going, right? The stress is there. We feel it in our body. To be able to pull ourselves down by saying, what's the to-do? What's the action to be taking? That can help us funnel what can be just this non-specific stress into an action. A lot of people these days are feeling burnt out, right? And what is burnout? It's really the syndrome that results when we're dealing with chronic stressors, particularly work related, that are interfering with kind of home life, and that's not being successfully managed. So really important for, those of us that are managing and supervising others to be making sure we're jumping on things like video calls with people to be able to see, right? We can't tell through an email how someone's doing, but to check in, hey, Joe, we haven't caught up for a while. Just want to check in how you're doing with everything. Anything I can do to support. How are things going with workload, right? Checking in on these kinds of questions. And certainly those symptoms that I was talking about, if you start to notice those in someone that you care about or work with or in your personal life, just start a dialogue, right? Joe, I just want to check in. You just haven't been your usual self the last few weeks, and I'm just wondering if there's anything I can do. Right? Very easy way to kind of start. Sometimes what we're doing is a little bit of self-disclosure. I'm finding things really hard. How about you? Right? And the connection, I can't overemphasize. I mean, the science will tell, I'm a research scientist, and the science will tell us that our social connections, if we're going to put energy into one thing in our life, it's going to be the single most important thing that's going to help us live to 100. Okay, loneliness kills. And it would be a whole nother webinar to talk about the damage of all of these restrictions and lockdowns. But the most impactful as a psychologist has been the distance that's been created in our relationships. And I believe that we have to find ways to remain connected in ways that feel safe and comfortable for all of us as individuals, but making sure we're off our silly devices and the text communication and reaching out. So if there's a second takeaway, so first is make sure you're getting real good at recognizing your signs and those of people around you. Number two, be connect. So think right now, maybe you've got a buddy, a friend, a relative, somebody that you haven't connected with for a while, but you really care about them and they care about you, and it's been a while since you've caught up on life. Make a little mental note, or even better, a little written note. Drop them a note today. I was going to say go for a walk, but the weather's kind of crappy. If they're in geographical proximity, do that. Otherwise, I know we hate Zoom. We all hate it. We all hate it. We all hate it. We're sick of it. Jump on a video call, right? Second best is at least a voice call, but this texting business is, we're just not getting the richness of relationships. And we don't do things like share how we're feeling through text in quite the same way. A lot of us are feeling burned out these days, right? And so what we want to do is get also really good at looking at a whole range of other symptoms, because emotional stuff is not just about our emotions. We know that when we are feeling less than ideal emotionally, we're exhausted, we're having sleep issues, mentally, we're not as sharp, right? We're bored, forgetful, we're not concentrating, and we withdraw from responsibilities, and we procrastinate, and we get behind on things, and we use good old things like food and drugs and alcohol to cope. And so get very good at recognizing, and maybe just do a mental check as you're going through the symptoms here and thinking, which of these are familiar to me? I just invite you to throw into the chat, maybe some of the negative ways to deal with stress that you've experienced, or maybe you've observed around people. So what are some of the unhelpful coping things that you're seeing these days? Yeah, just try harder. And so, Tom, I want to make sure I'm understanding that, but that idea when we're just telling ourselves just do more or try harder in a kind of negative way, is that, am I understanding that right? Or isolating?
Yeah. Well, more of, you've got 1,012 things to do. As I look at my friend Joe right now on the camera, but you've got 1,012 things to do and you don't have enough time. Well, just push harder. Just keep going, just push harder, which is fine for short term, but over medium and long term, you can't.
We tap out, right? And we crash and burn, and we know that. Yeah, thank you, Tom. Isolating. Yeah. Well, we're not feeling great and we think, oh, what do I have to talk about? I'm just gonna be negative. There's nothing good. We're more likely to just withdraw and isolate, and we go into our head. We don't reach out to people. We avoid things that make us feel stressed, which can make it worse in the medium term. Thank you, John. Yeah, it's taxes, bills, paperwork, right? All these kind of things that start to pile up, and we think out of sight, out of mind. Well, it kind of works for the short term, but it sure as heck doesn't do a lot in terms of our long term. So in the moment, right? Sometimes we need to do that. We need to say, I'm going to shelve this for a day or two, and I'm going to come back to it after a good night's sleep. But when we're finding we're shelving things for weeks or months, that often we're just kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. What are some of the good things? Like, what have you found is working and helpful? And what have been some of the kind of go-to things from a positive standpoint that you've been doing? Peloton, keeping physically active, exercise, and therapy. Thank you, Tom. Prioritizing my health, making lists, and delegating. Certainly something I'm trying to get better at. Yeah, there's, I once through it was actually kind of business training that I had done, had one phrase, and it's been on repeat in my mind so often, especially the last few months. If everything is urgent, nothing is urgent. If everything is urgent, nothing is urgent. And it's so simple, yet there's so much wisdom, right? When we're running around like, oh, that email, oh, this. It's like we have these dings and dings and dings that make everything feel like they're urgent. And sometimes what we need to do is just kind of bring ourselves down and say, what is actually the priority today? What is the urgent thing to be done, right? And it's about prioritizing. Movement, we cannot underscore. We know things like serotonin, which is our brain's natural antidepressant, shoots off when we're moving and exercising, when we're laughing and socializing and connecting. And so these aren't just feel-good things to do for the sake of it. They're things that lead to a change in our biochemistry. And so now let's go through a whole host of different things that we can start to think about when we are thinking of positive ways to deal with stress. Okay, simple, but not. Avoid unnecessary stress. We may say, oh my goodness, what does this even mean? But here's the reality, right? There's things that we have to deal with, right? The urgent work deadline that has a non-negotiable, firm stop, versus the stressors that we can choose to eliminate. So for example, the stress that we have when we're running late for something because we got caught in responding to non-urgent emails. Okay, right? And we know the difference. It's like we're caught on nothing that's even urgent, and inadvertently what we've done is created this kind of urgency that doesn't need to be there. And so really get good at asking yourself, and I do this a lot when I'm under high demands, is I just stop and I get pen to paper. And someone said, make a list. Erin said, make a list and delegate. And I will put pen to paper. What's top priority? And I'll kind of chronologize, right? The reality is often we don't have more than a handful of true urgent priorities at any given time. Get those often off the list and out of the way first, even if the inclination is to avoid, right? Because then we get caught, oh, well, you do this and I'll do this and I'll get this done before I know it. And we've created this situation that we can control. I have a new favorite list, which is called my not to-do list. And sometimes what's happens, we have a crappy week, and let's say our sleep has been awful, and we say, you know what, the not to-do list is, I'm not going to care about cleaning the house this week. I'm going to be cool with ordering in food. I'm going to make life easy because my priority is catching up on sleep. We can't do it all, right? We have a finite limit on the number of hours in a day. And so we have to get very good at saying what is off the list and what goes on the list, and recognizing our limits. And sometimes this is the hardest part for us to self-reflect and say, wait, hold on. Am I getting tapped out right now? And if so, there's going to be some no's that I have to give. Identify the causes of your stress. And again, this might sound like one of these simple things, right? It was, we're stressed about COVID and work and the kids. Okay, so those are very generic. That doesn't help us know what to do. And so when we can get more precise at articulating the source of the stress, we can get more precise in figuring out what a solution is. And so again, I'm a big fan of old school pen to paper, right? What are the things that are stressing you? Write down, what is it specifically? So kids are stressing me out, right? Let's just use a generic. Okay, what does that mean? Kids aren't doing their chores, kids aren't doing their homework, kids are interfering or interrupting you when you're working. Which is it? Because those three different things are going to have three different interventions. And this is, there's a lot of wisdom in an excerpt from the Serenity Prayer, which some of you may recognize. Grant me the serenity to accept that which I cannot change, courage to change those things that I can, and most importantly, the wisdom to know the difference. And sometimes what we got to stop and ask ourselves is, do I have control over this? And how much real estate am I going to let something take up in my brain if it's in the category of things that we can't control? Right? Easier said than done, I know, but it's more a mind exercise. So what you're kind of doing is, we know that the way that we talk to ourselves in our brain to ourselves is a very big, impactful part of how we feel. So it's almost like you're kind of doing therapy on yourself, right? You get stressed. Okay, what's the function of this? What can I control? What's the action? What do I need to do? And we can go through those kinds of questions in our brain and bring ourselves down. So we want to get good at kind of forcing ourselves to ask these questions of ourselves. And then we want to problem solve, because what happens is we get caught in the stress, right? Okay, I'm stressed about the kids. Okay, but then we don't actually start to articulate action steps. And so what you want to start to do is, again, put pen to paper and say, what are possible solutions? What could I do? What are approaches? What's maybe something I haven't tried before? We want to get very good at creating good routines. So one of the things that has been really impactful for a lot of us with this kind of colliding of work at home and, the work from home element is the structure and routine is out the window. And anybody here who is a parent is going to know we need structure and routine. So think of what happens to your kids when there's no structure and routine, right? No set bedtime, no set this. I know, Joe, you're a new dad. You're going to be learning this real good and fast is, okay, we are creatures of habit. And even those of us that may be spontaneous free beings as adults, we need structure and routine. And so what can we control? Here's what the science tells us. We can control what we put in our mouth. We want to go high on what were we taught as kids? Our fruits and vegetables. So the data will tell us that being heavy in real non-processed food, which is things that grow in real life, mostly fruits and vegetables, is really good. Drinking our agua is a really important thing. Small little shift. We can, of course, always make ourselves drink water through the day if we want to, and we can move. And I know it's harder these days. Again, speaking even personally, gyms are closed. You don't want to go here. You don't want to do that. The weather's kind of crappy, but find ways to move during the day. I'm so grateful. I had a stand-up desk well before COVID, and it has been the best investment. You can get, good stand-up desks that are quite inexpensive. And if you are able to do that, I'd say it's one of it's a great thing that can just force you not to be sitting as much. If you're not able to do that, just think of moving in the day. If you're doing phone calls or listening to messages, just get up, walk. Try and think of standing meetings when you're on the phone if possible. Just things that can move our body, even if it's not a workout. We know just regular natural movements through the day are really good for us, because exercise has been my top New Year's kind of goal or intention as well, is, through the day, I'll be making my coffee and I'll just think, I'll do about 20 squats right now. I'll stand there as the coffee's making, and it's not a big anything, but collectively, if we do that, 10 or 15 times through the course of a day, all of a sudden we've collectively gotten 20 to 30 minutes of movement. So think of little cheat ways that you can approach this. Ultimately, we know alcohol, while it may be tempting, while it might take the edge off after a hard day's work or a hard week, while it might even help us fall asleep if we're having sleep issues, alcohol is an antidepressant. So what that means is an agent biochemically which amplifies negative mood, right? So it exacerbates feelings of depression and anxiety. And the rule is, if you're feeling happy as a clam and life is awesome, across every index, no big deal. Go wild. Have an extra drink once in a while. There's going to be no big harm that comes from that, in moderation, right? Of course. But the rule is, when we're not feeling well, emotionally, physically, sleep-wise, one of the best things we can do is just cut out alcohol for just even a few weeks, right? Give our bodies, 3-4 weeks, sometimes a little bit longer, to just have it out, get our sleep back on track, start to get our energy back on track, and then go back to it when you're feeling better, if it's in your life. And sleep. Oh my goodness. So one is, we'll follow up with resources for you. I could spend a whole day speaking to you about sleep, but we've got, we're very active on social media, and we've got a YouTube channel. We've probably got about 12 different YouTube videos and blogs just on sleep. They're all 3, 4, 5 minutes long. And we know that there's good behavioral strategies that can help us enhance our sleep. And so if you're having chronic insomnia, I'm going to really encourage you to pay attention to getting a little bit more information on non-pharmacological ways, so non-medication oriented, that you can do to enhance your sleep. And so here's a few tips. One is, the time that we wake up in the morning is more important than when we go to bed. So what this means is, have a fixed wake up time, even on non-work days. So sleeping in, for a few hours more than you normally do on a weekend disrupts our circadian rhythm. And the idea here is, we want to control and have a rigid time that we're getting up within about a 1 hour window. And the rule is, we can get into bed whenever we're feeling tired and sleepy, right? And so where you want to adjust is on the getting into bed end. So go into bed earlier if you're tired, rather than sleeping in, because of the way our internal biological clock works. We run on a 24-hour circadian rhythm, and that time that we wake up in the morning gets it going for the day. Hard on a day like this, when it looks like cloud and gray out the window, but even in the winter months, we know, about 10 to 20% of us are going to find mood more affected at this time of year. And we have something called seasonal affective disorder. And many people will get kind of winter blues, even if it's not at a clinical level. Even on cloudy days, opening the blinds and curtains and just gazing out the window, even on a dark, cloudy day, is still getting natural light in through your eyes. And I won't bore you with the details, but it starts a whole chain reaction in our pineal gland, affects our melatonin production, and all these things collectively help us feel a little bit more energized. Some of us that may be dealing with more clinical issues of seasonal affective disorder can really benefit from a light lamp. And so that's something really important to talk to your physician about, if you or someone that you know is dealing with a seasonal component to mood. And often you'll get some coverage through extended benefits plans for a sad lamp as well. Napping wisely, if and when possible. We know most of us aren't able to have that luxury, but certainly can help. But the rule here is, you keep it nice and short and lean, 20 to 30 minutes usually. Good old caffeine, my favorite drug. We know that caffeine can really impact our sleep patterns. And we know that caffeine has a half-life of 5 hours. So what that means is, when you have a coffee, 5 hours later, half of the caffeine is still in your body. And 5 hours later, half of that caffeine is still in your body. So why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because if you're having sleep issues, a general rule is cut off caffeine by about noon at the latest. Because by 10 p.m., 5 hours, and then 5 hours later, you're still having about a quarter of that caffeine in your body. And so if you're having coffees by 3, 4, 5 p.m., that's just another little factor that might impair your sleep. Avoiding exercise right before bed, cutting down alcohol, we've already said, but creating a relaxing bedtime routine. So again, those of you that are parents, you know the value of this. So what we don't want to do is be glued to the tube until 11 p.m. and then thinking, oh crap, I got to get into bed and get up and then get prepared. What we want to do is, before bedtime, get into our pajamas, do the good things like brush our teeth, turn down the lights, dim everything down and slow our body and brain down, especially in that kind of hour before we want to get into bed. And that means put these silly devices, you can't see it, put these silly devices away. My phone in our household our phones go into airplane mode at nighttime. Your alarm will still work. And then my phone goes into my night table drawer. Why do I do that? The alarm still goes off. It still rings loud enough for me to wake up in the morning. But it's so I'm not tempted. If I'm waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning and can't sleep and my thoughts are going, I'm not tempted to hit that screen and see those notifications. Keep your bed for 2 things, sleeping and sex. No TV, no on the phone, no on your computer, no scrolling social media. And this rule, kind of hard to do in the winter or less enjoyable, but if you can't get into bed, the worst thing you can do is just lie there and let your thoughts go and go and go for hours. The reason is then that anxiety state is getting associated with bedtime state, right? And what you want to do is separate out worry. So go worry in the living room, go lie on the couch and get those worry thoughts out. But get into bed when you're sleepy, not tired. 2 different things. So we know what sleepy is, right? It's like when our eyes feel like they're going to close and we're going to conk out. That's a better way to make that bed be a real good stimulus for sleep. Okay, start to think about your thinking. Anybody want to guess how many thoughts we have in a day? Throw a number out there. And Darlene, good question about reading. Here's the rule. Reading before bed is okay. One is if it's an old school book and not on a device, because the light that comes out from our devices interferes with sleep state. And if you are the person that can read quietly for 20 or 30 minutes and then away you go and the book's put away and you're falling asleep, awesome. But if you are the person that's sitting there 2 hours later trying to get through the next chapter, it's not going to help. 100 thoughts a day, 50 thoughts a day. Okay, the estimates will say too many thoughts a day. It's too many. 1,500. Okay, Joe, I guess you're closest to being the winner. It's between about 14,000, 14000, up to 70,000, 70000. Yes. 14,000 to 70,000 days. It is unbelievable. A very hard thing for us to track and measure, but the best estimates we've had will say we're just thinking, we think all day, right? We're thinking, but most of our thoughts we're not aware of because every time we get into the car, we don't think, where does my key go? Do I check the lights? Is my belt on? 10 and 2, right? Now, I'm using driving as an example. We can all think of how much cognitive energy went into learning to drive for those of us that drive a vehicle once upon a time in our teenage years, right? And so there used to be a time where, probably most of us couldn't even play music or think. And all we had to do was focus on driving because we're thinking about the act a lot. Over time, of course, what happens is we can do the same drive, a gazillion times and we're thinking, how did I get through that town or past that exit? Or, we're automated. We're not even thinking about the drive anymore because it becomes so automated. So most of our thoughts become automated over time. Okay. However, what we know is this can be a good thing for activities that are like sports or playing an instrument or, whatever activity it is that you're doing, baking bread, right? There's all these things that we learn that we don't have to think about as often over time. But the downside is if we have internalized negative thinking, if we have past experiences, relationships, our family of origin, background, trauma and adverse life experiences that a big chunk of us will have dealt with, sometimes we get internalized voices that we're not good enough. We're not doing enough. We're losers. We're stupid. We should suck it up. We should, right? And we go through all this nasty stuff in our head of how we talk to ourselves in a way that we would never even think about talking to somebody else. And so think about your thinking. When you're under high stress, put a little spotlight on how you're interpreting things, right? Is the spilled coffee in the morning, does it become a catastrophe in your brain? Are you like, oh my God, my day is ruined? Or are you the person like, here's a hassle, what a pain, I should slow down, back to it, right? Because that difference with how we interpret what comes our way has a massive impact on our emotional states. take time to relax and recharge, okay? And this feels very hard for a lot of us to do. And, we go wild if our batteries on our computers or our phones are down to 5%, or we're looking for our chargers and where is it? Plug it in, get it going, get it working, right? We do this, but we don't do that for ourselves. And think about what fills you up. For some of us, it's sitting in peace, having a cup of tea with nobody around us. For some of us, it's immersing ourselves in a book. Some of us, it's going for a run. Some of us, it's connecting with someone we really love. And so think about ways you can add a little bit more of that. And I'm going to ask everybody, just throw into the chat maybe one thing that you're like, that's a real good thing that helps me unwind, that maybe you're not doing as much of as you'd like to these days. Yeah, Gabriella says you can't pour from an empty cup. You are so right. Yoga. What else? Meditation. And both those things, both yoga and meditation kind of bring us down to the present. Daily movement, yoga, spin class. Now, when we're moving, right, things that get us immersed in activity and movement, it's hard for us to be thinking about too many things. Think about hobbies. Think about if you like playing your guitar or painting, or not yet gardening, but soon we'll be getting to gardening time, right? Just think about things that let you turn off other stressors and just intrinsically are rewarding. And so a nice little segue, making time to cook. I generally enjoy cooking versus it being too much of a task. Yeah. So when we enjoy that, right, that can be, again, we're just present. Our hands are being used. Our brain is focused on what we're doing. And that just turns the volume down on stressors. There is such a huge science on the value of things like yoga, meditation, breathing. We have a whole bunch of kind of YouTubes and blogs again on this as well. And those of you that might feel a little bit nervous, that would think, oh my goodness, I could never do meditation, or that seems like too much for me. I promise you, like, all of us know how to be mindful. All of us get into meditative states some of the time without even knowing it, right? There are things we do when we go for that run, or listening to a song that we love, or, we naturally know how to do that. And sometimes when we can just learn a little bit more about how to cultivate it, it can help us get even better. So those of you that might think, oh, I'd love to learn a little bit more about mindfulness or meditation, there's a whole host of free apps that can help you with that. Using the Calm app. Thank you, Gabriella. Calm is a fantastic one. And so one of the kind of more popular, robust ones, and it's fantastic. Sometimes we want to hit pause and do nothing. So we don't want to go for that run or bake that bread or do the activity. Sometimes all we want to do is stare out the window and do nothing. Sometimes we put on our jacket and our shoes. We have no plan in life. We just go for an aimless walk, right? Sometimes we just sit there in the back, no music, no book, no distraction. We're just there. Okay, and there's such an immense value on us hitting that pause button and doing nothing. So that helps charge us up. Good old Nike tells us, just do it. And here's what we know from all of the science around cognitive behavioral therapy is fake it till you make it kind of works. And so when we're feeling low and crappy and we don't want to call our friends back and we're isolated and sitting like slugs in front of the TV, what we want to do is tell ourselves opposite action, which means get up, connect, move, right? When we try to force ourselves to do the opposite of what our negative or unhelpful mood might be getting us to do, that can start to lead to this chain of physiological and other effects in our brain that naturally feels better. So like hands up here. Well, I can't see everybody's hands, but you put in, has anybody ever felt bad after they have made time for movement or exercise or a walk or a run? Yes. Okay. Erin, do you want to say more? Now, I don't mean this in a forced way, right? It's not when we're feeling so crappy, but the reality is there's a lot of things that are intrinsically rewarding. That if we try to do it, we're like, okay, maybe it hasn't solved the issue that was happening or contributing, but rarely is it that we're feeling like, oh, that was a terrible, shouldn't have gone for that run, right? Usually it's the other way around. We're feeling, I wish I didn't just sit there and do nothing for hours. Yeah, if I'm using it as an excuse to avoid something, yeah. So we got to be mindful of our avoidance. And then finally, sometimes we or someone that we care about is struggling so much that contacting a professional, seeking therapy. We'll send you a whole bunch of resources on both free and other services, counseling and clinical wise. We've got a clinical practice with a range of clinicians that provide therapy, and happy to share information on that as well. Is sometimes we need to go talk to our family doctor, get a referral, thinking about maximizing our extended benefits and seeing a psychologist or a registered counselor. Okay, and just to sum up here, and then we'll open it up for questions. Stress is ultimately when the demands on us exceed our resources. We often can't control the demands, but what we can do is build up that reserve through all these good things: sleep, diet, exercise. Acute stress, normal part of life, comes and goes. We know when we have chronic stress that we're not managing, it becomes a little bit harder for our body to kind of replenish itself. We know when we're under ongoing stress, this has many ripple effects on our emotional and physical well-being, how we perform at work, how we perform at home. We know that mood issues are not just affecting mood. There's a whole bunch of physical things that happen when we are dealing with stress and anxiety and depression. We know that not all stress is bad. There's a motivating component. And when we can get good at understanding what's the function, what is this stress telling me to do now, that we can leverage it. We know burnout is a high risk thing that a lot of us are dealing with these days, and really important for us to think about ways that we can hit the pause button on all the demands. And sometimes this means connecting with people at work about demands and priorities and deadlines and supports that we might need. And finally, we know that there's a whole host of things that we know that can really help us reduce our stress. We just need to get in the habits. The same way every day we drink a little bit of water and we eat a little bit of food and we move our body at least a little bit, right? Whether we're trying to plan exercise or not. Just in the same way, we can teach ourselves without even thinking to challenge our thoughts, to turn the volume down a little bit, to practice things like gratitude and setting an intention, to remember to breathe, to do nothing, even just for a few minutes in the day. And those are very good things. So thank you so much for your time. I'm going to stop the share now. And would love to open it up. I know we're at 10:29. Oh, my apologies there, Joe, but I am happy to stick around to make sure I'm answering all questions and comments that people have.
Yeah, so I'll open it up to the group, but just to note quickly, I think Shauna asked a question earlier that was about how can you say no to more work without feeling guilty?
Yeah, great question, Shauna. And so, it's one is usually we're probably not showing up and just saying no in a work environment, right? We probably do that a little bit more easily in our personal environment, but there's a few elements. One is first really recognize what it is. What would help relieve demands, recognizing your kind of, the point that you're at with demands. And then it's about dialogue and communication and connection. So it's about connecting with the person that usually is our one up to be able to set a meeting, right? And sometimes what we want to do is have a dedicated time, and we want to be able to just share. How much we share is dependent on us personally and how much we trust the individual. But to be able to say, feeling like I'm pretty overwhelmed. I've got A, B, and C on my plate. I know D and E are something that I'm required to do. I'm a little bit worried because of X, Y, and Z that I won't be able to do this and this and this. And I'm looking for some direction. What's the priority? Where do you want me to put energy in of all of these things? So it's not that we're giving a hard no right from the get-go, but what we're starting to do is a few things. We're starting to give information out that, wait, hold on, there's a lot on my plate and I'm floundering. We're then trying to get clarity around what is the priority among all of these various elements that are coming up. And we're also seeking some support and direction as we go through that. So that's often where I'll suggest to start when we're thinking about needing a reduction in work demands. This is another good question. With everyone going through a lot, how should you balance supporting yourself with supporting others? This is a great question, John. There's not an easy answer, but the reality is, I often think of the oxygen mask metaphor. We all know, right? What are we told when we used to go on planes? Put your oxygen mask on before you try to deal with anybody else's. And while in the moment, we're not recognizing that, the reality is if we're going down, the rabbit hole of just getting down and low and burnt out and exhausted and down and low, and we know it and we recognize it and we see it, there's a cost that comes along with us not putting that energy into ourselves first. And I'm not meaning in this selfish way that we push people off by any means, but sometimes what all we're doing is being mindful of how much we're giving and offering to others. And because we're no good to anybody, right? The reality is we're not good to our partners or our kids or our parents or our friends or our jobs. If we're burnt out and exhausted, we will show up better for everybody if we're at least getting ourselves to a certain baseline. There's no one size fits all answer here. We all have kind of this intuitive sense of when we know we're getting to that max point. So all I say is we recognize, are you in kind of a, if you're in a green zone or a yellow zone, if we use colors, maybe it's okay, right? You can spend that hour or two supporting so-and-so and doing this. But when we're getting into orange, and certainly when we're into a red zone of our own emotions, probably not going to serve us well to be trying to focus on everybody else. And usually what we need to do is just reset ourselves for a week or two, get a few things back on track, and then we can show up for other people.
I have a quick question. So I really appreciate the number of practical tips and guidance that you've provided on ways to manage stress and improve our well-being and the like. I'm wondering if of all of the various things that we can do in this space, if there's one or two things that in your experience have proved to be the most effective or the most important.
Yeah, great question. So yes, I know. So number one is sleep. A third of us, at least at minimum, and this was pre-COVID data, deal with chronic sleep issues. And our data now will say it's more like 40 or 50. So like half of us are dealing with ongoing sleep issues. And most all of us have probably dealt with some waxes and waning in our sleep. And we all know if you go a good week or two without good sleep, we are irritable, we're anxious, we're feeling off, our body temperature feels off, our appetite's off. Every single thing is exacerbated. And so one of the things where we can get biggest bang for buck initially is get that sleep on track. And when someone's in the therapy room, that's almost one of the first things I'm working on. Then closely related to that is I focus on what I call the usual suspects, which are the things we can control. We can't make ourselves fall asleep, but we can create good patterns that are conducive. Number two is our diet and health behaviors. And so it's probably the biggest thing that's gone off for most. So we can control. We can make sure we're not, binging on unnecessary, unhealthy food. We can make ourselves get, a few meals through the day that are reasonably balanced. We can curb down our alcohol use and up the water intake. So those health behaviors and movement, right? And again, this doesn't mean like we're not even allowed to do the, big old gym workout, but it just might mean being intentional through the day that you're just going to move your body in some ways rather than sitting when you're done the day, that you're going to actively just make an intentional focus to just move your body. Sometimes put on some music, bust out some dance tunes to yourself, right? What I do, it's silly. I hate cleaning, as most of us do, but we got to clean the house. and so one of the things I like to do is I just blast music, and I'm like, cool, I'll put on some music, I'm going to move around, I'm going to think I'm getting some exercise, and I just do this little game. And sometimes all we do is we focus on the end result. I'm going to feel good when the house is clean, right? And so, think about ways that you can embed the normal stuff that you have to do. Somebody said it's like fun has been canceled or something like that. So add in fun when you're making dinner. Like, again, I just love music. And so that's often a cue to me when work is done. I walk out of my office and I'm in a condo, right? So it's like, there's the kitchen, there's the laundry, there's the bedroom. But I'm like, computer lid goes down. Small thing, but an important thing. And usually music will go on somewhere, even if it's quietly in the background. So you're making dinner and you're doing the odds and ends we all have to do at home. It just associates with something a little bit nicer and better. So those would be the things that I would suggest. And socially connect. So those of you that are staying connected, great. Those of you that are like, I'm withdrawing and I've just not been connecting in the way that I normally would, put an emphasis on that.
Any more questions from the group? I have one more. You highlighted like a really astounding fact about the number of thoughts that a typical person will have in a day. And I mean, tying that back into some things you said earlier about, stress and anxiety being tied to the character of the thoughts that we have. So do you have any tips about letting go of thoughts or not identifying with thoughts?
Yeah, it's so I will, one is I just threw an evaluation form in here. It just will be really quick. So it'd be great for people to fill that out. One of the things, and we'll follow up with, is we'll put together a little newsletter that links to some resources, and I'll make sure I put sleep stuff in there. And we've got a psychological health and wellness resilience toolkit, which is just basically a bunch of handouts. And I've got some in there on challenging our thoughts and things that we can do to reduce our thoughts. So I'll try to give a concise answer, knowing that I could do a whole 1 hour on just CBT and cognitive behavioral therapy. So what do we want to do? Number one is awareness. And we'll go back to this, is we don't know what to do and change until we become aware. So how do we do that? Is we just put attention on our thinking. So, if we're going through the day and we're feeling like we're just stressed, is trying to articulate what you're saying to yourself in your head. And we do all kinds of things. We call ourselves names. We get catastrophic. We make mountains out of molehills. We get irritated at, there's another email I'm never going to be able to do. Yeah. And then we just have these little tantrums in our brain about things that are happening. And I can't see everybody smiling, but I hope a few more are smiling, because I know I do it. I know when I'm mad at the number of emails in my inbox, I'm like, okay, Jody, time to take a chill pill. Calm yourself down. It's not the email's fault, right? It's our society's fault. But when we're reactive, I'll really be mindful of just how I'm interpreting what's coming. So it's becoming aware, and then it's challenging our thoughts. So this is not, and this is a very important point, it's not about Pollyannish thinking. It's not that, just look on the bright side and life is awesome, no big deal. I've got house and a food, life's great. Okay, now that may be true, right? I'm sure many of us are grateful to have shelter and all these, important things in life, but it also feels invalidating when we're going through crappy stuff, right? We're like, okay, yeah, sure, I know that. So it's not about discounting or invalidating, but it's not making things as catastrophic. So, just think of when we go through a relationship breakup and we, visualize ourselves dying alone 50 years from now. Well, it's a little bit of catastrophic thinking. It doesn't mean say, that's great and everything happened for a reason and you'll find someone else, because that's probably not so that accurate in terms of validating anything. But when we can hone it in to be a bit more realistic, this is really hard. I am feeling extremely sad. The pain feels unbearable. I know I'll find a way to be able to get through this, and it might take some time, but I know I have people that care and love about me, and I'm going to figure out a way forward, right? You can see that dying on your deathbed alone is catastrophic. Thinking life is great and everything happens for a reason invalidates, but when we can get to that happy place of acknowledging, but with perspective, what's happening, and not in an exaggerated kind of catastrophic way, that just turns the volume down ever so slightly on the intensity of emotions we're experiencing.
Thank you for that. So, I guess we're 10 minutes over here, and I really appreciate you staying on for an additional 10 minutes. I think your talk today was wonderful. It was very insightful, as well as very practical. And I hope it was of benefit to the group here. And I think it was, judging by the questions during the talk and the back and forth on the chat. So thank you very much for coming to speak to us today. And just as something to point out to the group here, I mean, if you are struggling in particular with issues around stress, psychological health, and things of that nature, I strongly encourage you to reach out to your manager, your director, or even directly to Stephen to talk about these sorts of things. This is a very understanding group, and everyone is here to support you as much as we can. So I hope you're able to take some of the lessons from today and apply them to your work and to your home life. And if you need additional support or just need someone to chat, I mean, reach out to folks on your team who you report to me, or to whomever else. So with that, thanks again for such a wonderful presentation. It was very nice to meet you, and to everyone, have a good rest of the day.
Thank you so much. My pleasure, and everybody stay healthy and well, and I hope to see your group again.